So our presenter tonight is Luci Cadman. Luci is the education coordinator for the Northshore Black Bear Society. And that society is a nonprofit organization that has two objectives. To help reduce bear activity in urban areas and to promote responsible coexistence with wildlife on the North Shore. A little background on Luci. Luci moved to Vancouver from England 7 years ago to be closer to nature. Yes, we're close to nature here, I guess. And she's living on the North Shore, so she's even closer. She's an avid hiker. Her background is actually in finance. So she stumbled upon her adventures with the North Shore Black Bear Society completely by accident. She lived in the neighborhood with a lot of bear activity, and she thought it was wonderful to see bears passing through the neighborhood until she learned of the consequences for them doing so, like coming through neighborhoods. Luci spent 2 years volunteering with the society before taking on the role of education coordinator. To expand the society's outreach beyond attractant management and basic practices for living and recreating in bear habitat, she took her bear viewing guide training with the Commercial Bear Viewing Association of BC. Did you know there was such a thing? I just learned about it. So she learned much more about bear behavior there. Although she's hoping to get experience guiding in the coming years, so guiding bear viewing, at this point, it sounds as if she's going to be pretty busy with the North Shore Bear Society, Black Bear Society, for some time, because in January, when the current ED retires, she'll be taking over that position. She was saying that things have been very busy this year with a record number of reports and lots of outreach. And by the way, she was also just recently, I think it was November 21st, was it, Luci? You were doing something for Nature Kids.
Yes.
Nature Kids BC.
Yes.
Yeah. I will actually try and remember to put a link to that presentation in the chat if anyone wants to check it out. So Luci, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and present to us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I can tell that you guys are a riot already, and I'm certainly going to be signing up to become a member after this of Nature Vancouver, and your website is excellent, so good job there. So yeah, I'll just share my screen and then we can get going. I am very grateful for everyone sharing the time this evening to learn a little bit more about bears and some other wildlife too. Alrighty, so the North Shore, the North Shore is bear country, and our nonprofit was started back in 1999 after 39 bears were killed on the North Shore in just one season. And so residents formed an education program, and in 2005 we became a society, and we're partially funded by all 3 North Shore municipalities, and we do apply for grants as well, and we accept donations and honoraria and such to fund our education program. We maintain a website where residents can report bear activity, and we really rely on people that live and visit the North Shore to let us know where they encounter these bears and other animals. So a couple of years ago, after receiving an increase in reports for coyotes and cougars, and really starting to understand that people didn't have much tolerance for these animals passing through the community, I decided to expand our education program to cover the basics on coyotes, bobcats, and cougars. So we are the North Shore Black Bear Society. That is our main focus. And for many years, we've been focused on attractant management, the best practices for living and recreating in bear country, but have expanded it even further to do bear safety workshops. So we offer different kinds of workshops. We've got exploring in bear country, which has all the best practices for hiking, biking, trail running, and camping in bear habitat. I might also do bear safety presentations for people that work in bear habitat, and we tailor our workshops to suit all ages. And we use social media, and that's been very helpful this year. We use Facebook and Instagram to share educational messaging. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to connect virtually. Typically, I spend a lot of time in schools on the North Shore. Usually I'll stay for the whole day and speak to every class. We also do adult bear workshops, of course. One of my favorites is welcoming newcomers to Canada. Just like me, it's a whole education on how to live with these beautiful animals. And we'll also typically be at lots of community events where we speak to hundreds of people throughout the year. So certainly moving forward, if you see us at a display, we might be at Rice Lake, Capilano Regional Park. Please come and say hello. Other outreach methods are that we write to every single person that buys a house on the North Shore, and we welcome them to Bear Country. And we share all the best practices for securing food sources around our homes, as well as some general information that they need to know, as it's normal to see bears traveling through our neighborhoods here on the North Shore. And if you live on the North Shore, if you've visited, you may have seen some other things that we do to let residents know that we've got bear activity in the community. Our volunteers place signs in the district and the city of North Vancouver. We do get bears in the city. And in West Vancouver, the Parks Department place those signs, but certainly if you live in West Vancouver or see a bear in West Vancouver, we can arrange for that sign to be placed. So these signs go up in residential areas typically for 2 to 3 weeks, and we move them around a lot. And this year's really been a record year for us. So last year, we received about 600 reports of bear activity from across the North Shore, and residents can make reports through our website, through social media. There's 2 different phone lines that they can call, including my personal cell. So that's 600 reports in total last year. This year, we received 600 phone calls alone. And so we received about 1,200 reports of bear activity this year. And I know for sure that we don't have more bears on the North Shore, but there are more people out and about on the trails to see them. I've also been expanding our outreach on social media. So our followers have grown by about 6,000 people. And so more people are aware of other avenues to report bear activity. And certainly lots of us have been working from home. And so bears that are traveling through the community, typically unseen, are now being noticed, as well as many people now have cameras outside of their homes. So that really increased cougar reports. So cougars are nocturnal animals, typically traveling through the communities very rarely, but very late at night. And so people don't often actually have an encounter, but they capture in on these ring cameras and whatnot. So general sightings of activity have gone up because there are more people living here and recreating on the North Shore. Other things that we might do when people report activity to us, well, everybody that reports bear sighting gets a PDF version of Guide to Black Bears, which has quite a lot of in-depth information. And we might also visit the community and go door to door to let people know the bear has recently been sighted in their neighborhood and what they can do to make sure that bear keeps moving on. Now, sometimes bears have no choice but to travel through our communities in search of natural foods. And given where we are on the North Shore, such a beautiful location, so close to the forests, the mountains, many of us are very fortunate to live beside these forested areas, the creeks and rivers, these wildlife corridors that animals use to travel. We also see bears in the community not just for food, and we'll talk about other reasons why bears spend time in the neighborhoods a little bit later, but this is just a screenshot of the bear in area signs that went up on the North Shore this year. It's about 400 signs in total. The red icon just indicates that that sign is still up as of today. We may have had our AGM last week and wrapped up the season, so to speak, but the bears are still awake and very active. And you can see from this map that they are absolutely everywhere on the North Shore. As I mentioned, you can see them in the city of North Vancouver, 13th and Lonsdale sometimes. We have bears down at the beach, and we have bears near the Auto Mall. So they're traveling extensively in search of food. And that's why we expect to see them in the community. And everything that we do is we teach people about those food sources around our homes, of course, that will encourage the bear to stay in the community. And we're teaching them about bear behavior as well, and most importantly, how we should behave around these animals. So just Speaking about BC, BC is bear country. Goodness, we have more bears living here in BC than anywhere else in the whole of Canada. It's thought that we've got about 10,000 grizzly bears and about 120,000 black bears that live just in BC. Now, we do not have grizzly bears in the wild on the North Shore. We do have two orphaned grizzly bears, Grinder and Cooler. They've been living in a habitat up at Grouse Mountain for about 19 years now. But you don't have to go too far from the North Shore to be in grizzly territory. Just go to Manning Park, Hope direction, or even to the backcountry, or sometimes downtown Squamish and Whistler, and you'll be in black bear and grizzly habitat. So we like to just talk about the physical characteristics of how to tell these bears apart. Imagine you're in the backcountry of Whistler and you see a bear. Which bear is it that you're looking at? Well, you might think a brown bear, which here we give the nickname grizzly, has brown fur, but in fact, it's not always the case. And black bears do not always have brown fur. So grizzlies and black bears can both be black, dark brown, light brown, cinnamon, blonde, and very rarely even white. So physical characteristics that we look for, one of the most noticeable is the hump on the grizzly bear's shoulder. That is all muscle to help that bear dig. Grizzly bears love to dig. Now, grizzly bear claws are very long and quite straight. They can be up to 11 centimeters long. And they use these long claws for deep, precise digging. They like to dig up the roots of plants, dig for clams on the beach, and dig up ground squirrels. And that shoulder muscle also helps them to dig and turn over rocks to look for bugs. It's also going to help them prepare their winter den. So grizzly bears tend to den at subalpine elevations, and they'll use those long claws and that muscle to dig a tunnel and a chamber into the side of the mountain. Very, very different to black bear claws. And this is a model of a black bear claw. So both those bears, both those species have 5 claws on each paw. And a black bear claw is very short and sharp and curved. And these are actually designed for climbing. So black bears are excellent climbers. They can scale trees in seconds. They'll also use these claws to dig up ant hills. They'll rip apart logs to look for bugs, but primarily these are for climbing. Very different to a grizzly with the straight claws that are quite long. It's hard for a grizzly to climb a tree. If the tree has lots of limbs, they can certainly pull themselves up. But grizzly bears like to be on the ground, and they typically live in big, wide open spaces. Black bears love to live in forested areas. They've evolved in those dense forested areas. Trees are a safe place for a black bear, which makes the North Shore the perfect home for these wonderful animals. Other things to look for are the ears. Grizzly bears have small, rounded ears, and especially this little black bear cub here, black bears have big ears, kind of like Mickey Mouse. Also, the shape of the face is quite different. Grizzly bear has a dish-shaped profile, whereas a black bear's face is very straight. So they're just some ways to tell those different species apart, should you be in grizzly and black bear habitat. So on the North Shore, we have the smallest and most common bear species. We have the North American black bear. And this is an example of a brown colored black bear. So this is something, we like to let people know. We'll often get calls from people, say in Lynn Valley, that call and think that they have a grizzly bear in their garden. Certainly not. It's going to be a brown colored black bear. And many of our bears in West Vancouver are this brown phase. This bear also has a chest blaze, that white patch on her chest. And these individual markings help us to identify individual bears, and they're all different shapes and sizes. Some cubs are born with a chest blaze, but then in the first few years of their life, the color of their fur and their markings will change, and they can lose them. So it's very difficult to identify individuals until they get to their typical coloring at about 4 years of age. And you don't see one of these on the North Shore, but something very proud to live here in British Columbia is the Coyote bear, or most commonly named the spirit bear. This is a subspecies of black bear. And they can be found in the Great Bear Rainforest, the only place in the world where these bears live in the wild. And the parents of this bear could both have black fur, but they would need to carry a recessive gene that very rarely produces these white-colored black bears. And it's thought that about every 1 in 20 bears born in the Great Bear Rainforest is born with white fur, and there are about 200 to 300 of them living in the Great Bear Rainforest. Bears have got some excellent senses. They can hear very well. Common misconception is that they don't have good eyesight, but in fact they see very well, just as well as we do. They see in color and they see very well at night. But a bear's best tool is their nose. Their nose is 2,000 times more powerful than ours. Now, we typically trust our eyes. Bears trust their nose. They use their nose to identify things, whether it's a person or an animal, and they use their nose to find food. Now, black bears and grizzly bears actually spend quite some time stood on their back hind legs, stood up just like people. Another misconception is that is an aggressive posture. In fact, that's curiosity. So the bear is lifting their head from the ground in order to pick up the different scents, to hear and see better. So just like when we stand up on our tiptoes. And so bears do stand, and they do stand sometimes when they encounter people. You might be in the forest and the bear hears a noise, the bear stands up on their hind legs, and that's that bear, remember, lifting their nose to pick up your human smell, all right, to identify what you are. So a standing bear is a curious bear. And they're very fast when they want to be. Even our really big bears, and we can get some big bears on the North Shore, sometimes 400 pounds. When they need to, they can be very fast and can run at 65 kilometers per hour, which is faster than any of us can run. And we certainly should never try to win a bear in a running race. So we must remember that wild animals, cougars, coyotes, bears have that natural chase instinct. So rather than running away from these animals, we need to be nice and slow and calm with our movements. I do let people know on a regular basis, don't be afraid if the bear doesn't run away from you. Okay, these are very intelligent animals and they are adapting to the increased human and dog activity in their home. If a bear ran away every time it saw a person, they would have no energy left to survive. And so they conserve their energy and they might walk away. They might not even leave the area. It's certainly very rare for bears to actively approach people with intent. It does happen. We'll talk about what to do a little bit later, but that is very rare. But we are letting people know that it's normal for us to see bears during the daytime. And they're not nocturnal animals. All right. And just because a bear doesn't run away from a person, it does not mean they're bold or aggressive. All right. In fact, it's a good thing when bears are somewhat comfortable around people, and that's really different from approaching people. But we don't want bears to feel defensive around us or our pets. So it's a good thing, really, when bears don't leave the area very quickly. And as I said, black bears are very, very comfortable in trees. It's their safe place. If you see a black bear in a tree, it's very rarely going to come down until you are far away and it feels safe. They have been in trees for days, feeling trapped, whether it's another animal or a person. It really is a place where they spend a lot of time, especially in the summer. The bears will seek shade in the trees. And of course, there are food sources such as the Pacific crabapple. That's a fall firm favorite for black bears. And so we're letting people know that if you see a bear in the community and the bear goes into a tree, well, if everybody runs outside and stands at the base of the tree with a cell phone, all you do is you trap the bear in a residential area, making that bear a really easy target, and also stressing and putting a lot of pressure on this animal. So the best thing that we can do if we see a bear in a residential area is to come inside and be nice and quiet so the bear feels safe enough to climb down the tree and leave the area. So this time of year, and for a few weeks before this, bears have been preparing their dens. And for a black bear, they're typically denning on the forest floor. They might find a cave on the North Shore, and they'll typically make their den under a big old fallen tree in a nice quiet spot, but not always. Some bears, what we call the vulnerable population, so females with cubs and young juvenile bears, they're actually forced to be active during the daytime and forced to occupy areas a little bit closer to people in order to avoid dominant male bears. They get the best feeding times when we're all asleep, and typically the best feeding spots away from people. And so that forces the vulnerable population to sometimes even den very close to the community, and sometimes very, very close to established popular trails. Now, fortunately, bear dens, the entrances are very small, so they're not very noticeable unless you're actually looking for them. And the reason that bears den is not because it's cold over the winter. They've got 2 layers of fur, one underneath an insulator to keep them nice and warm, and one over top to keep them dry. But it's because of a huge decrease in food availability. And so bears conserve their energy, and they go into their den. Typically here on the North Shore, around late November to mid-December is when bears will enter their dens, and they can be inside the den for up to 6 months. Now, we do get year-round bear activity on the North Shore, which means that some bears either enter their den for a short period and leave, or they will not den at all. And that's how humans are changing bear behavior. When we leave unnatural food sources like bird feeders, garbage, pet food available to bears over the winter, that can keep some male bears awake and active year round. And we certainly have seen that on the North Shore in the past couple of years. Now, when bears go into their den, they don't go into a deep, deep sleep. They're not true hibernating animals. In fact, every single day they move around and they stretch and they groom, and that keeps their muscles working. Now, for the whole time that they're inside of that den, they don't need to eat, drink, or go to the bathroom. So bear dens are nice and clean. But they need to be prepared should a predator, another animal, a person enter the den, or most commonly the den will flood in the late winter, early spring. And so the bear needs to be able to respond very quickly and leave the den or defend themselves, especially if it's a female bear that's given birth over the winter. So all our black bears and grizzly bears are born around the very end of January, early February. Now, bears have got delayed implantation, which means that mating season is actually in the late spring and summer months, and the male and female will get together for a few days and separate. And that female, to give her cubs a higher chance of survival, she will be quite promiscuous, and she'll mate with a few different males. And that's because male bears are the biggest threat to young bears and bear cubs. Okay, so if a male bear remembers, and they've got incredible memories, that he's mated with that female and he sees her with cubs, then he'll leave those cubs alone because of the chance that they could be his. So that gives those cubs a better chance of survival. And so the female bear, she'll spend the summer foraging, and in the fall, she'll go through a stage called hyperphagia, excessive eating, to prepare for the winter. And if she enters the den and she's nice and healthy, those fertilized eggs will attach and develop, and she'll give birth over the late winter. If, however, she enters the den and she's malnourished or injured, any fertilized eggs will absorb into her body and she won't give birth. And that's her body understanding that she's not strong enough to feed and raise these cubs, because she is the sole provider. Now, typically, black bears and grizzlies give birth to 2 or 3 cubs, and for both species, the record is 6. And when they're first born, they're incredibly small and vulnerable. They're about the same size as a chipmunk. And remember, the mother doesn't need to eat anything over that period, but they do. And they're drinking their mom's milk, and bear milk is really rich and fatty. So it helps those little cubs grow from the size of a chipmunk to the size of a cat in about 3 months. So that's all going on over the winter, and we start to see bears emerging from their dens here on the North Shore around early to mid-March, and it's always the male bears that leave first. They're bigger and stronger, of course, And when there aren't many natural foods available to these bears that wake up quite early, they'll be typically foraging for winter-killed animals, and that's an important food source for these male bears. Now, it can be quite tricky, actually, to determine whether it's a male or female bear that you're looking at. Now, if you see a bear with cubs, then that's most likely a female. The males don't raise the cubs. And we can look at other features as well. Typically, male bears, apologies, have a really wide face, and they've also typically got lots of scarring as well when they'll compete for food sources, a fishing spot, or a female with other males. Another thing that you can do, and of course, I'm never encouraging people to actively go out looking for bears unless you're with a guide or someone that's experienced. And we certainly don't want to approach them. So I'm sure you guys all have a pair of binoculars. That's one of my favorite things to take out with me when I'm going out looking for wildlife, of course. And then we can see the natural behavior of these animals. We're at a good safe distance for everybody. We're not putting pressure on them. We're not moving them away from natural food sources or forcing them potentially into the path of dominant male bear. I've seen that happen. People have approached bears for photographs. I saw it just this spring, actually, a female bear with her 3 yearlings ready for dispersal, and a photographer approached the family within about 10 meters, intentionally, of course, and the mother bear stood up on her hind legs, and this wildlife photographer was terrified and ran away. What the mother bear was standing up for was to look for an exit, because the photographer didn't know that a male bear was about 50 meters away. And the photographer could have pushed this family into the path of that male bear, who would have been a big threat to those juvenile bears that she had with her at the time. So certainly we're trying to help people reduce our impact, enjoy our beautiful wild spaces, but certainly respect that when we go into the forest and into the mountains here, we're going into the bear's home and other wildlife, and we really need to do all that we can to reduce our impact. Back to how to tell the difference is if you've got binoculars, watch for when the bear pees. They do pee a lot, and if it goes forward, it's a male bear. If it comes out the back, it's a female. And next to leave the dens are the female bears with last year's cubs. So they'll den together, and the following spring they emerge, and she'll spend a few weeks with them, teaching them about spring food sources. Remember, the previous year they were still in the den at this time, and so this is a really important time to teach them about those spring foods. And very suddenly what's going to happen, though, is she's going to be really intolerant to their presence, and she's going to push them away, and that's dispersal. And it's very aggressive. It's quite heart-wrenching to see. The cubs have no idea why this is happening, and she can be very, very aggressive. Now, a female cub or second-year cub, or we just call them teenage bears, yearlings is the correct term, but she'll let the females, she'll push them away, but she'll let them stay on the periphery of her home range, but males she'll send much further away. And she sends them away because it's about to be mating season. And so those big dominant male bears will be coming down the mountain in search of females. And so she's very aggressively pushing them away to keep them safe. But family breakup is very distressing for everybody. Goodness me, and these teenage bears often spend lots of time crying and whimpering and feeling very sorry for themselves, and I feel sorry for them too. And this time of year as well, in the early spring, it's typically when we get a lot of these young bears coming into the community. They're curious, just like young humans, they're curious, exploring new food sources. And so that's a time of year that we get these young bears in the community. And the last to leave their dens are the female bears that have given birth to cubs over the winter. And one really, actually probably the biggest misconception about female black bears and cubs is that many people believe that she's incredibly aggressive, and it's not the case whatsoever. In fact, statistically, a female black bear with cubs is the least dangerous bear that you will encounter. Female black bears are especially timid, and the way that they protect their family is not by defending, but typically from retreating. Rarely they might do a bluff charge, that's a step in your direction or a run in your direction, but it's not intended to make physical contact. It's just their way of communicating through body language that they feel threatened by you, give them space. But that's actually still quite rare. Typically what black bears do to protect their cubs from dangers, people, dogs, other animals, is they'll clack their teeth. And this little cub is taught as soon as they leave the den how to climb a tree. So the little bear cub will scoot up the tree so fast, you won't believe it. And the female bear will stay at the bottom of the tree and she's going to be really quiet. She's going to hide. She doesn't want to confront you. These are intelligent animals that don't want to be injured and they don't take big risks. So she's going to stay with this cub now for the spring, summer, and fall, protect them, teach them how to climb, how to swim. They love to just splash around, but of course, they need to learn how to fish as well, and they'll swim to get to other places. We've had a lot of bear activity down on our beaches here on the North Shore this year. The bears have been swimming in the ocean to the islands to forage for berries and then coming back onto the beach and eating seaweeds and crabs and mussels and such. So there's lots of natural foods around those areas as well. And let's talk about bear foods. Now, grizzly bears and black bears are classed as carnivores, as meat eaters, but much like us, they're omnivores. And only 15%, sometimes just 10% of their diet is animal protein. About 10% of that is bugs. They like to dig up ant hills. They really like moths as well. Honey, we know they like honey, but they like to eat the bees inside the hive as well. And of course, salmon. So this time of year, we're letting people know that we should expect to see bears beside our creeks and rivers. It's a very important food source for them at this time of year, especially as they're trying to gain lots of weight to prepare for the winter. And typically what black bears do when they grab that salmon, and I'll just show you here a model of a black bear skull. And this just shows us as well what bears are designed to eat. But bears will use their canine teeth to drag that salmon. They use their claws as well to catch it, but they'll use these canine teeth to drag that salmon into the forest, and they'll typically eat their favorite parts, which are the brains and the eggs and the belly and the skin, and they leave the rest in the forest. And that, of course, helps to feed other animals. Anything left over feeds the soil, helps the trees to grow. So I'm sure you're aware, bears and salmon are keystone species, and they are vital in maintaining a healthy and balanced ecosystem. So this is a small amount of their diet, but in fact, most of what grizzlies and black bears eat is vegetation. They very much like grass, clover, dandelions. So think about in the early spring, if you're driving up to Whistler, you see all those food sources by the side of the road, and that's where we do see lots of bears at that time of year when we don't have the berries yet. So certainly if you see a bear as you're driving, we ask that you slow down and give the bear lots of space, but please don't pull over, please don't stop your engine. That's going to get the bears comfortable around vehicles, which is contributing to them being hit and killed on our roads. We've lost 2 bears this year on the North Shore, one killed on the highway in West Vancouver, and another young female bear was hit by a car in a residential area in West Vancouver. And when the conservation officers, the government wildlife agency, attended to that bear, it was quite a few weeks later, and her injuries were very infected, severely so apparently, and so she was euthanized. So we do lose lots of bears on our roads, even our residential roads here on the North Shore. But they are very, very resilient too. We had a bear hit by a car not too far from where I am actually, and the bears healed up very well, and typically over the winter that's a healing time for these animals as well. We do have another injured bear, unfortunately, in West Vancouver. That's a bear cub. We don't know what happened to this cub, but they can't put any weight on the front right paw. But it's very important that, you know, this bear, this little cub, he's able to stay close to mom. I've seen him feeding, they're just eating grasses and such in people's gardens, no garbage or anything like that. And so it's really important that this family stays together, and hopefully those injuries will heal over the winter. Back to other foods, berries, of course, are incredibly important to bears. We ask that people on the North Shore don't pick berries from the forested areas, but rather pick berries from around the community. Be careful what you pick, of course. And bears have got really loose lips. They're not attached to the gum like ours. And so they're able to kind of like vacuum up all these berries without damaging the plant, again, because that's a reliable food source they can return to. And when they eat so many berries, about 40,000 in the summer, every day, they go to the bathroom about 15 times a day and help to disperse these seeds. We've got mountain ash there, and just in the corner there, that's the Pacific crabapple. That's really a fall favorite, and we get lots of residents calling us to say they have bears in their crabapple trees. And just wanted to show you again the skull of this bear, which just shows us that they are designed to eat lots of vegetation. They've got these canine teeth in sizes here, which is going to help them to take the heads off dandelions and such, and all these flat molars for crushing and grinding that vegetation. So if this was a cougar skull, obligate carnivore, just eats meat, so all the teeth are really sharp. So bears are really designed, black bears and grizzlies, to eat lots of vegetation. And as I mentioned, the fall is a very active time. Typically, for the fall months, they are active for 20 hours a day in search of food. They're looking to consume about 20,000 calories a day in order to survive that winter period without any food. So it is unfortunately typically the time when we get more activity in the community. You know, these bears are looking for extra food sources. Things like bird feeders are really high in calories. And unfortunately, it is also the year when time of year when most bears are killed. So as well as teaching people about living in bear country and making people feel safe and learning more about these animals, our intentions are to reduce the number of human-caused deaths of black bears across BC. The numbers are incredibly high, unfortunately. And in the wild, they can live 20, 25 years. This is an adult female bear eating dandelions in Manning Park, really are one of their favorite foods. So they're just some seasonal habits and a bit of a life cycle of the black bear. So just to recap, that female bear will give birth in January, and she'll stay with that cub spring, summer, and fall. They'll den together for one more winter, and then the following spring they'll be dispersed. So they get 1.5 years with their mom, and much of that time is spent inside of the den. So it's really important that we give these animals the space in order to teach their offspring all the things that they need to know in order to survive. And let's just talk about some best practices for when we spend time in bear habitat. Well, we live in BC, so you know, we might have a bear in area sign, but we certainly, when we spend time in our green spaces, should expect to see bears. And remember, on the North Shore, you can see a bear absolutely anywhere, whether you're having a picnic on the beach or up on the mountain. And remember, any time of year as well. Not many, but we do have a couple of bears usually every year that stay awake all winter. So clues to look for to see if a bear's recently been in the area. Lots of people will report that they've seen bear scat. They've not seen the bear, but they've seen the present that the bear left for them in their garden overnight. So bear scat, and that's my foot there, just for scale, of course. During the spring, when they're eating lots of grasses, it's typically very dark, very black. In the summer, it can be bright pink and purple, and actually can smell quite nice. Because they eat so much vegetation, their scat really doesn't smell too bad. And in the fall here, you can see Pacific crabapple. So bear scat's a really good tool. It lets us know not whether it's a grizzly or a black bear. That's pretty difficult to tell, but it certainly tells us if it's an adult or a cub. Tells us what the bear's been eating and roughly how long ago the bear was in the area. So if it's nice and shiny and wet and maybe steaming a little bit, you know, a bear's recently been around. So I do like to have a poke around with a stick once I've got my photo, of course, to see what's in there. Sometimes, of course, we find plastic and we know the bear's been into the garbage. Other times I'll find bear scat that is this big with whole entire apples inside without even a bite taken from them. So that way I can tell it's a big bear we've got moving through the neighborhood. Other things to look for are bear tracks. So I love when it rains and it's nice and muddy. It's a really easy time to look for wildlife tracks. So bear tracks look a little bit like human footprints, but hope you don't leave big claw marks like that. So bears have got 5 toes, and they don't have retractable claws. So they do leave a claw mark when they walk. Now, it's very difficult actually to find a good clear track. I'll sometimes go to a spot and find 20 piles of bear scat, but not even one good track. So these are rare to find them, but certainly if you see bear tracks going one way, that's an indication to turn around and take a different trail. Remember, we're not wanting to approach these animals intentionally. To tell the difference between the species, you really need to look at where the claw mark registers. So for a black bear, remember, their short claws will register much closer to the toe, and a grizzly much further away. Other clues to look for are marked trees. These are pretty easy to find on the North Shore as well. So certainly when black bears climb trees, their sharp claws leave a slight mark. But these are deliberate markings that the bears make as a form of communication. So all bears mark trees and scratch trees, but typically it's males that are leaving these very obvious signs. And so usually the male bear will reach up super high on the tree to make himself look even bigger. He marks the tree with his claws, and it leaves behind a scent. And that tells females that he is in the area. It also tells younger bears, especially those that have just been dispersed, a big dominant male bear is in the area, and they know to move on. So we certainly ask that if you find these, take a photograph, but please don't touch it and put on your human smell and take away the bear's message. So that's a form of communication, as well as rubbing their backs on trees. So you might find some bear hair on the tree as well. And other clues are big shredded logs. So skunks will do this, but on a small scale. And this tells us that a black bear is using that space looking for bugs in the logs there. So when we spend time in the forest, it's really important that we are aware of our surroundings, of course. We really promote not wearing headphones so that you can be listening out for what's going on around you. Certainly when I'm out in the community and there's been a bear report, if I've lost sight of the bear, I'm counting on other wildlife. I'm listening for the Steller's jays and the crows and the ravens, and they always tell me where these large animals are. So listening out for, snapping branches and other animals that will let you know if something bigger is around, as well as looking out for that big pile of fresh bear scat and the bear tracks. It's very important that we make ourselves heard, and certainly we don't mean to scream and shout when you're in the forest, but we must use our voice. Bear bells are useless. They do not identify you as a person, and noise doesn't travel very far. Your voice is your best tool. Bears recognize human voices. They don't know English, so you can talk in any language. But when you're walking on the trails, make sure that you're calling out often. I hike alone, and I'll just talk to the squirrels and the birds occasionally. If I'm walking by a water source or around a narrow or overgrown trail, then I'll be slower and louder. And that gives bears and other wildlife the opportunity to hide from me and avoid me. And typically for a black bear, that means scaling a tree. And when they're in the trees, they're very, very quiet. So I'm sure you guys have been in the forest with bears above you and not known. We of course promote staying on the trail so that we don't damage sensitive wildlife habitat, we don't get lost, and so we don't disturb a bear. Okay, so the bear might be resting in the bushes or eating, and if we go off trail, we could just disturb them. That could promote defensive behavior. They feel pressured, and that's certainly something that off-leash dogs do. So dogs, rather than keeping you safe from wildlife, in fact, are the cause of more than half of all negative wildlife encounters, off-leash dogs, that is. And off-leash dogs bolt off into the bush, they frighten the bear, and the bear might chase the dog. Typically, dogs run back to you, the owner, and that's when people and bears have these close encounters. So keeping your dog on leash is really going to reduce the risk of a negative encounter with wildlife. And leave your phone alone, especially if you're having a bear encounter. So I did mention about approaching bears and how that can disturb their natural behavior. I've seen it where people have approached a bear with a cell phone for a photograph and moved this bear that was fishing for salmon in a creek very close to a residential area, frightened this bear away from its fish. The bear dropped the fish, ran off into the neighborhood, and was killed a few days later for being in a residential area. So our impact on them is huge. When you have an encounter, though, it's really important that you are present, and you need to be watching what the animal is doing, but you've also got to look out for other people. Other people can put you in dangerous situations when they don't behave properly, when they approach. So certainly be very, very aware of everyone and the wildlife if you have a close encounter, and leave your phone alone. I never leave food unattended. So certainly when we spend time in the forest, we need to be prepared with snacks and water and such, but we can't leave that food unattended. I see it all too often. People having picnics in our parks. So they'll, snag the table with the cooler and walk back 10 minutes to the car and leave that food unattended. Now, it's really rare for a bear to approach a person for food, but certainly if we leave that food with no one around, they're opportunistic and they'll take that food source. I've seen it as well with unattended backpacks. That led to the death of a bear at Rice Lake last year. Climbers were leaving their food in their packs at the bottom as they were climbing at the top, and the bear learned they could find food. Now, the bear wasn't aggressive, didn't approach people, but as a precaution, that bear was shot and lost their life. So it's really important that we are responsible with food that we take into the forest. And then we advocate carrying wildlife spray. It's called wildlife spray. It's effective on cougars as well as bears, and know how to use it, of course. So there's a great, it's quite cheesy, but a really good video on our website, northshorebears.com, which shows you when and how to use this. I never, ever go onto the trails without my bear spray. I've never had to deploy it in over 200 encounters with black bears, some of them very close, some surprise, but I always have it with me. You must have it accessible. It's no good to you in the bottom of your pack. So it's a really good tool. It's a non-lethal tool, okay, to be used in the very rare situation that you're giving the bear space, but the bear still approaches you. This is a very intense pepper spray. And so basically it builds a wall between you and the bear, but we certainly want people to know when and how to use this correctly. We don't want to be just spraying any bear that we see on the trails, but it is a great tool. And let's just move on now to bears in our residential areas. I will just say one thing about big bears. Now, I did mention that we typically see the vulnerable population of bears in our community during the daytime. Those females with cubs and juveniles will sometimes get bigger, older bears as well. The thing about really big bears is they look super scary, but in my experience, I found them to be the calmest, easiest going bears that I encounter. They only have survived to become big because they've learned how to adapt and share this space with us here on the North Shore. So they are my favorite. The reason we don't want bears, we'll see them passing through always, but we don't want them getting comfortable around our homes. That's for our comfort. Most people don't want to open their door and see a bear asleep on the porch. It does happen here. And of course, for safety. Now, the risk of being injured by a black bear is incredibly low, okay? Despite the fact that we all love to spend time in their home, risk of injury is very, very low. In a period of 119 years, 73 people have been killed by black bears across the whole of North America. And the risk of being injured in a residential area is especially low. Those deaths, as tragic and terrible as they are, typically have taken place in remote wilderness areas where bears are not used to encountering people. And the other reason, and my motivation for doing this role, the reason that we don't want bears to spend time getting comfortable in the neighborhoods and finding food, of course, is because they almost always pay with their lives. Last year across BC, conservation officers killed 542 black bears alone. That does not include the bears that were killed in the 2 legal hunting seasons that we still have in BC. Bears are being poached for body parts, being found all across BC, including a young bear that was found this year on Cypress Mountain with their internal organs removed. And of course, we lose a great deal of bears on our roads. So when we leave food available and encourage the bear to spend time in the community, as a precaution, that bear loses their life. As I said, it's not because they're being aggressive. They are by nature calm, peaceful animals and very, very rarely aggressive. I have moved bears on from, I've seen a bear in a garbage can, I've approached them, always bear spray ready, And I've never had any kind of pushback from these animals, okay? And we're trying to let people know that we set those boundaries. We've built our homes beside wildlife corridors. We should expect to see bears passing through. We set the boundary by not having anything available for them to eat. And when they come into our property from a safe place, we need to encourage them to move on. So I'll just very quickly cover the top food sources. Garbage, unfortunately, is the most commonly reported unnatural food source. Here on the North Shore, nobody now is permitted to put their carts out overnight, and fines have increased. We've got enforcement now for protecting wildlife, which is great, and we're very grateful to the municipalities on the North Shore for all that they're doing to reduce the number of human-caused black bear deaths. But certainly garbage and organics need to be secure until the very morning of collection. Bird seed, I know you guys like to feed the birds. If you feed the birds in bear country, obviously you might be end up feeding the bears as well. So as an alternative to hanging these bird feeders that are really packed with calories, we suggest putting a small amount of seed on a plate when you're home to enjoy watching the birds, and bring that inside. As you can see, bears are active during the daytime, so bringing in the feeder at night can't be the solution. And they're very good climbers. Remember, they'll climb to the roof of your house, second floor deck to get to a bird feeder or a hummingbird feeder. Hummingbird feeder is like an energy drink for them. So, it's possible to hang bird feeders as long as they're inaccessible. And that means being about 10 feet high off the ground and about 10 feet away from any reaching point. These bears have got an incredibly long reach. So there are ways to do it. Please reach out to us if you live in bear country and you feed the birds. And then fruit trees, of course, these make up lots of the calls over the year. And sad to say, but bears are killed for eating fruit from our trees on the North Shore. And of course, that encourages them to spend time in the community where they could get hit by a car. We ask people to collect their fruit before it ripens and have it ripen inside. And if you can't maintain your fruit tree and you don't wish to, please remove it. If you want the fruit, then we can install and maintain electric fencing, which is now very much affordable, portable, and it's a really, really good tool if maintained and set up correctly to keep your fruit safe and the bears safe. I'll quickly just go over some other common food sources. So outdoor fridges, freezers, and coolers, not advised. Remember, bears can smell frozen food. We can compost, but we need to aerate that often. Pet food, so bears aren't coming into the community to eat your pets unless it's a chicken, but pet food is a strong attractant, so we want to feed all our pets inside. Dirty barbecues make up a few reports every year as well as unattended food. So please don't set up a nice dinner outside and then leave that food unattended, or even unattended food on the barbecue. All right, so it's normal to see bears passing through gardens on nice summer evenings, and a few people this year have had to abandon their food because the bear got to it first. And open doors and windows and garages. Here we want people to only have the garage door open if they're in their immediate area. Bears can enter the garage, of course, where there might be a freezer or a fridge. They can also become trapped inside a garage. And if a bear enters a confined space, that also increases the risk of that bear being killed. And electric fencing is great too if you've got any of these. So very sadly, a lady called me the other day. She lost her honeybees. I think she'd forgotten to turn on the fence for once. And on that one occasion, the bear that was in the community did find her beehive. And she didn't blame the bear, which is very kind of her, but she's packed that all away now. And petroleum products, really anything stinky, smelly, that's really going to interest these bears. This is pretty gross, but one of the strongest attractants in garbage is actually dirty baby diapers. And some people might have their garbage in a shed, and it might not be so secure. And sometimes if there's something very odorous like fish fertilizer or dirty diapers or grease from meats inside a structure like that, typically a wooden structure, the bears can be a bit more persistent and actually cause property damage to gain access to those high rewards. And again, property damage not tolerated by the conservation officers, and those bears are typically trapped and killed. And then food and vehicles as well, got to be very mindful with making sure our vehicles are clean and that they're locked as well. It's rare for a bear to actually break in, but certainly if the door's unlocked, they're smart and they can make their way in, as a resident on the North Shore found out this year. And I know it's gone, but for next year, Halloween treats. So lots of people this year had candy like hanging outside. I know we've had to kind of adapt to the new measures and everything, but bears have been known on the North Shore to get into bowls of candy that have been left on porches, and they do like pumpkins as well. If you have a bear on your property, well, if the bear is eating something, it's going to be really difficult to move that bear on. So certainly what we suggest is allowing the bear to finish eating, but remember, we want to encourage the bear to move on. So from a safe place, and a safe place is a deck or an open window, we need to make noise. And again, our best tool is our voice. Okay, in the past, I've kind of advocated for air horns, and whilst they are a good tool, bears are getting used to all the loud noises from traffic and from the ferry, for example, in Horseshoe Bay. And so air horns might not become very effective. And then when the air horn doesn't work, people think the bear's aggressive then or habituated, and that's not the case. Typically, I find, again, your voice is the best tool. So from a safe place, you want to set the boundary and tell the bear they're not safe or welcome. You can make eye contact in this situation and use a deep, firm, harsh tone, and you persistently tell the bear to go away. You might clap as well. Be very persistent. Remember, on all stood up, we're taller, we're more dominant, so we're using our human dominance. But as the bear starts to walk away, and remember, rarely will they run, as they start to walk away, that's when we can cool it down a little bit and calm down, because the bear's doing as you have asked. But certainly want people to, maybe grab a quick photograph, but then put your phone away and move the bear on. We don't want to stand there filming for 20 minutes while the bear gets comfortable in the garden. But this is very different to what you would do if you had a close encounter with a bear. And these can happen. Certainly, some bears just are comfortable on the trails. They might not always move from the food source that they're eating. And certainly, if the wind takes your human smell in a different direction, we can have close surprise encounters. Maybe the bear didn't hear you coming. And many people will know the old advice. And the old advice for what to do if you meet a bear is be really big and be really loud straight away. Now we know much more about black bear behavior. We know that we don't do that. When you're big and you're loud, you just intimidate the animal, you pressure them to feel defensive, and we don't want to do that. We want to show the bear that we're going to give them lots of personal space and lots of respect. So just imagine you're in the neighborhood or on the trails and you see the bear. First thing that we want to try and do is stay calm. Remember, they are calm animals. We want them to stay that way. I suggest taking a nice deep breath. That's going to help you relax and stops you from screaming. And then we do want to use our tool again, our best tool, our voice. And if you've got your bear spray as well on your hip, you can slowly get that ready. But you're going to talk to that bear in a nice calm voice to identify you as a human. Remember, the bear might stand. That's that bear picking up your smell, trying to figure out what you are. So we help them out by using our voice. Remember, we don't want the bear to feel defensive, so we're not going to stare at them eye to eye. All right, if you catch the bear's eye for a second or two, that's absolutely fine. But keep your focus on their chest, on their legs. Keep them in front of you always. And as you calmly talk to that bear, you're going to slowly distance yourself away. So slowly back away. And a couple of reasons that we back away is so that we can see what the bear is up to. It might be my accent, but whenever I talk to black bears, they look for the closest tree or they step off the trail back into the bushes until I've gone. And the other reason that we want to back away is by moving your body away, you show the bear that you're giving them lots of personal space and lots of respect. And that's what it's all about. Okay, so nice and calm and slow with your movements, remembering to use your voice in a calm way and moving slowly backwards to show the bear that you're giving them the space that they need. And really, that's all it's about. In the very rare situation, and I do offer more in-depth workshops on bear behavior and encounters. But in the very rare situation that a bear approaches you with intent, now sometimes the bear could literally just want to take the path that you were on or get to something behind you. I've had this happen. In that situation, you do your very best to give the bear as much space as possible to pass. If a bear approaches you, and typically it's out of curiosity and it's young teenage bears, they can't assert their dominance with other bears, so they might try and do that with you. And when a bear approaches, it's typically just asking for space as well. So if a bear approaches you with intent, so the bear's looking at you, this is when you stand your ground and you make yourself look big and you prepare your bear spray and you change your tone. You use that deep, harsh tone and you say, hey, and you let the bear know that they are now getting in your space. And when the bear, if they continue to approach, sometimes they do, sometimes just that firm tone is enough to send them away. But if they continue to approach, typical black bear behavior is to get quite close and then run away at the last minute. That's their way of pushing you away without making physical contact and getting out of there. Remember, they're really not wanting to become injured by people. But in that situation, if the bear approaches you, using that firm voice, if they continue to approach, that's when you would deploy your bear spray, and that builds that wall between you and the bear. And if you see the bear on the North Shore, wherever it might be, please let us know. I know I'm going over a little bit. I'm just going to quickly cover the basics on a couple of other animals that are a lot more active over the winter. And I know if you live in Vancouver, you probably see these more than I do. Certainly there's lots of hiding spaces for coyotes on the North Shore. We do typically get more sightings over the winter. That's their courting and mating period. So late December, early January, that's a very active time for them. They've also got the winter coats. So these animals are, about 35, 40 pounds, 50 max. They're actually really tiny, but when they get their thick winter coats, they look really big and healthy. So people often mistake them for wolves, but they're incredibly adaptable and can live almost anywhere. But it's great for a coyote to live closer to people, since we encourage one of their favorite food sources. So it's really, really good to have these animals around. Most of what they eat are rodents, and so they do a great thing for the rat population here on the North Shore. But certainly we also want to mention that we do not promote the use of rodenticides, of course. That's going to cause secondary poisoning to things like owls, coyotes, and in fact this summer we believe that a bear ate a half of a 5-gallon bucket of rodenticide that was intentionally placed to poison that bear. So thank you for writing your letter to ban rodenticides in Vancouver. But this is a great reason to have coyotes around. About 80% of their diet is rodents. And they'll also climb trees to eat fruit. In Whistler, apparently they are the cause of many young black bear deaths. They eat deer fawn, rabbits. They'll also eat garbage. Okay, so as I said, it's good to have these animals around. They're going to clear up the rodents for us, but we certainly don't want to encourage them to be close to our homes. They are a slight risk to pets, of course, but we don't really hear about that too often on the North Shore. In fact, raccoons are a really big risk to cats and small dogs that often people don't realize. Coyotes do get a lot of the blame for missing cats, but we've also got owls as well. So we certainly encourage keeping cats inside. So over the winter time, the male and female will mate, and then the female will make a den, usually around a creek, nice green space, sometimes an abandoned building. And she'll give birth to typically around 6 pups. And the male is responsible for finding this food and bringing it back to the den site. And then in a few weeks, those cubs will leave the den. The whole family will abandon that den, and they'll spend the rest of the season teaching those pups how to hunt until they are dispersed. Around the fall time, late fall, is when young coyotes are dispersed. Now, the alpha male and female might keep a couple in the pack and disperse a couple of these coyotes that then will go on to mate. Identifying signs, so coyote tracks are very similar to dog tracks. but they're in fact very, very narrow, and the two claw marks at the top are often pointed together, whereas a dog track, the toes are separated quite far apart. So that's one thing to look for. And you might probably have seen this as well around Stanley Park a lot. Coyote scat is usually very full of fur because of all the rodents that they eat, and bone as well. And they will leave the scat on established trails to mark their territory. Typically, most conflict, and I really don't even like using the word conflict, but most reports of coyote activity that come to us are in that winter period when it's mating season, and in the springtime when our dogs will threaten the den site. So coyotes will actually mark their territory to tell other dogs this is where they are, and they'll also be a little bit more defensive. Okay, it doesn't mean that they're making physical contact. Typically what a coyote will do is they will stare, or they will walk you away from an area, and that's the coyote trying to push you away from their den site to protect it. And so if you see a coyote, they're not a huge threat to people whatsoever. They're actually very timid and easy to scare away, and we should teach them not to approach people. And so with a coyote, it's very simple. If you ever had an encounter, or even if you see one in an area that it shouldn't really be, you just want to be really loud, and you can clap and yell. You might need to lunge as well, and that will typically send them going. And they usually will run away. They're actually very timid animals, and we should set those boundaries again with those animals and teach them not to approach people. Typically, injuries from coyotes in this area are from people that feed coyotes, and the coyote then goes up to the next person and might nip their finger. So very minor, but certainly something that we don't want. And then just lastly, our biggest wildcat on the North Shore, the cougar, a mountain lion, catamount. This animal's got the Guinness Book of Records for the most names. Incredibly elusive. We've got about 4,000 in Canada, and about 3,500 of them live here in BC. And in fact, Northwest Vancouver Island has the highest concentration of cougars in the world. And they are nocturnal, and they've adapted to be nocturnal to avoid us. So certainly encounters are incredibly rare, as are sightings. I have tracked these animals. I've been stood incredibly close, I know for a fact, but I've never seen one. Even biologists researching these animals sometimes have actually never seen one in the wild. Many of our cougar reports actually turn out to be coyotes, but we do get them in the community, typically passing through very late at night. Of course, they're going to be a risk to outdoor cats and small unattended dogs if they're out at night. And typically the coyotes that people do see are cougars. Old cougars that aren't able to hunt in the wild anymore come down into the communities looking for easier food like raccoons and house cats, or juveniles that have just been dispersed. So again, those teenage animals that are learning to navigate life without mom. And their main food source is deer. An adult cougar will take down a deer about every 10 days. And typically when we do get cougar reports in our communities, there are deer reports as well. So typically, when we're seeing deer, we should expect a cougar to be around. Snowshoe hare as well. So any kind of dead animals that you might find in the forest, that could be a cougar's cache, where they'll protect that food and store that food. So if you do come across dead animals in the forest, leave the area nice and swiftly. Other food sources. So of course, we encourage people not to feed any wildlife, including raccoons. If we've got lots of big fat raccoons in the community, that's going to bring more coyotes, more cougars. And anything that encourages rats as well. So fallen fruit and garbage, keeping our gardens nice and clean to reduce the rodent population is going to decrease the need for those bigger animals to be around our homes. And yeah, of course, we do promote cats being inside. I know they're a risk to the birds that you all love, and also they're at great risk as well from all the wildlife really that we've got on the North Shore: coyotes, cougars, bobcats, owls. And keeping dogs on leash again is going to reduce the risk of an encounter with a cougar. And cat tracks, the cats have got 4 toes and retractable claws to keep them sharp. They bring them in as they walk. So cat tracks typically don't have a claw mark. They've got 2 lobes at the top and 3 at the bottom, whereas a coyote has 1 lobe at the top and 2 at the bottom. So that's another way to tell the difference. This is a bobcat track, 2.5 inches roughly, and a cougar track, about 4.5 inches for an adult cougar track. And if you've had the pleasure of cleaning a cat litter tray, a wildcat scat is the same, very segmented. Cat scat has typically got lots and lots of big bones in there, lots of fur from deer, and it's usually very segmented and tapered at the end. And if you do see a cougar, very, very rare, but if you do, it's good to know what to do. With a cougar, you do want to make that animal feel threatened by you and show them that you're a challenge. So you immediately make yourself look as big as possible. You want to use a deep, firm voice. We're never going to be making like high-pitched noises around wildlife. Deep, firm voice, keep using your voice. Usually that's enough as well to back them off. They recognize our voices. And you do want to make eye contact, and you just keep moving. Don't stand still, very slowly back away. And yeah, thank you so much. Sorry that I went over a little bit there. I just have so much to talk about, but I do welcome any questions. But I'm very grateful that you shared some of your evening tonight to learn more about wildlife.